What is up? Welcome to another Friday technical live stream here in the Wiz channel. Today we are doing the second part of all things Supabase and Wized. So last Friday we started doing a deep dive into the Supabase integration in Wized, and the plan is that we're going to see everything that you can do both in Supabase and also bring that into Wized. In Wized we've got an official integration of Supabase. So you can use the Supabase SDK, but in the Wized way. And essentially, in this live stream, we're trying to not only learn how to use that integration in Wized, but obviously, you need to know some concepts around how Supabase works, what it offers, and the concepts behind it. So that's what we're doing in this series. If you've missed the first part, don't worry, you can follow along in this part and then just go back and watch the previous one because I think that it will be very helpful for many people. Um, so before starting to do anything, I want to say hi to the audience. I think that maybe today there's going to be less people because there's been a time switch, a time, how to say it, time change, time zone change. I don't know. In the US, there was a time change because of daily savings and they. My God, I forgot the words. The daylight savings now, and I think that in the yeah, thank you, thank you, Gabe. Daylight savings, and probably that's changing in the rest of the world for in the next weeks. I don't know because from my side, I live in Spain, and this live stream today started 1 hour earlier for me, and that's probably the case as well for many people. So anybody who's joining, first of all, I appreciate. Thank you for taking the time, and if it's 1 hour early for you as well, thank you for making the effort for coming. If you're coming and watching this in deferred at any other moment, anyways, I appreciate you watching this. I think that both Supabase and West are very nice tools, and if you are interested in learning, that's a good sign. So um, while we wait for everyone to join, what I'm going to do is just do a quick recap of what happened in the first live stream. All right. So you can still go ahead and watch it, but I'm just going to summarize everything. So let's share my screen super quick. This was everything that we did until the sorting limits and ranges. So we didn't do these last four things that I was planning to do on the first live stream. So we're moving those into today's live stream. So don't worry. So we had an overviews of Supabase. So we saw exactly what it offers. We can do everything related to database operations, to authentication, to object storage, to function invocation, etc. Then we saw how to set up Supabase in Wized, how to start creating tables. Then we saw just a little bit of the row level security concept, which is Supabase take on adding security to the database so that database can be consumed directly from the front end, from the browser, right? But we just did just a little touch. Today, we're going to go even deeper into row level security because it's actually one of the most important topics in Supabase. We need to understand it and make sure that we are implementing it correctly so your applications are fully secure. Then we saw all about fetching data, how to get all the data, how to narrow the data, how to just get some specific columns, how to get the data that it's referenced across different tables, how to count the data, how to use real-time filters, sorting, limits, ranges, etc. So all of that is what happened in a big chunk of the first live stream, right? And then the natural step after that would be to continue still dealing with data before jumping into authentication. So we're going to finish talking about the methods for dealing with data. We've seen how to fetch the data, how to select the data, but we now need to see how to insert the data, how to upsert the data, how to update the data, how to delete the data, all right? We're going to see this in today, maybe in like the first 10 to 15 minutes of the live stream. And after that, what I want to do is jump into what was originally planned to be the second part, which is all about authentication in Supabase. All right. We're going to see how to create users, how to sign in users, how to get the user's info from your web application, how to use how to use the user's info and create policies in the row level security in row level security. So those policies are based on the user. So maybe that the user needs to be authenticated, maybe the user needs to be a paid user. I don't know, we can come up with many different policies. And then we're going to see other signing methods. We're going to see magic links, all about sending emails and modifying the templates. If we've got enough time, although I don't know if we're going to have enough time in today's live stream, we're going to talk about OAuth 2 providers, GitHub, Google, Facebook, etc. And then we can also do some other minor things like obviously signing out, changing a user's password, verifying the user, etc. All right. John, thank you for dropping by. Hi from LA. Hold on. Isn't it very early in LA? Thank you for thank you for being here early in the morning. Nice. All right. So I think that we're good to start from where we left, which is inserting the data. So in the last Friday's live stream, we created a couple requests here in West. We haven't done yet much of actual coding or setting up things in West because we are mostly focused on talking about the concepts first before uh, updating the UI with stuff. But we had two requests, one for getting models, which in this case we saw things like applying filters, etc., and one for getting brands. And that's exactly what we got. Let me just give you an overview as well of the database, because in the database we created three different tables. We created a table for cars, and then each car has a model that is also stored in a table. And each model has some brand, it has a brand, which is also stored in a table. So if we go to the tables, we can see how, for example, let's actually, no, it's the table editor. We've got one car, just for the sake of testing. Then we've got some models in here. So we've got Q7, A6, A4, 718, etc. And then we've got some brands like Audi, BMW, Peugeot, Seat, Seat, Porsche, and Jaguar, right? So the idea is that today, let's just start creating some data, right? We want to see how to insert data, how to update data, upsert data, and delete data. Now, important thing to know at this point, remember that we just touched just a little bit of row level security. And for the sake of quickly testing things and showing you things, we have them currently disabled. As you can see here, if I go to the tables, my row level security is disabled for each table. That's not what you want to have in your production web application. Maybe it helps you when developing, like what we're doing right now, but make sure that if you're going to launch something, it has row level security enabled. We're going to see how to enable it today. Don't worry, how to add policies. So now it's disabled, meaning that anybody can create things, can delete things, can update things in the database. So let's create something, right? So let's go to Wist here, and let's imagine that we want to create a car, right? Remember that the cars have three columns: ID, created at, and then the model. So essentially, all we need to do is say, hey, I want to generate a new car, and that new car will be a model of, I don't know, a Q7, an Audi Q7. So in that case, I would, if I did it here manually, I would insert a row, and then the ID, I don't need to pass any IDs because it's automatically generated. Then I don't need to pass a created at field. I could technically do it, but it will default to right now, to the current date. So all I need to pass is the model ID fields. I could do it from here, but let's do it from Wist. I'm going to use, which model do I want to use? It's the Q7, which is the model ID 1. So let's go to Wiz here. Let's set up a new request. That request will be called create car, like that, right? And in here, let's select Supabase. Let's select create item. And first of all, I need to pass the table that I'm working with. So in this case, I'm working with the cars table, like that. And then I need to pass the data that I want to add. Anytime that I create a new data item, that I add a new item, I need to pass two things. First of all, it's the key. And the key essentially is the column name. So remember that here in the car, we've got three columns: ID, created at, and model. So the names of the columns are the keys that I can use to create new data. So in this case, I want to pass the model ID. So let's do model ID. And all I need to do now is just pass some value. In this value, remember that the Q7 model, it has an ID of 1. So let's just do this, return 1. And that's it. I can just come here and let's open this. Let's play it. And now I should see how I got a created status. Nice. It automatically returns to me the data of the car that was created. So I can see that it has an ID of 2. I can see that it was created at this moment. And also that the model ID, oh, hold on. Model ID, it's null, which means that I did something wrong. Why did I do something wrong? Let's refresh this. Refresh. Huh, interesting. It didn't send the sometimes it's happening. Maybe it's because I needed to reload the canvas. Model ID. Did I write it correctly? Model ID. Yes. Let me try it again. Yes. Yeah. So if for some reason something is not working as expected, always try to reload first in Wiz, because sometimes because of the cache, things are not working as expected. But don't worry, we've got here. I did that. Let's refresh here the data, and I should see now how we've got another item that was created now, and the model ID it's number 6. Let's delete this. This made me remember. Um, it made me realize that the model ID can be null, and I don't want it to be null. Never. So let's edit this table for a second. Model ID is not nullable. I don't want it to be nullable. I want it to be always defined, like that. Because then if we do it right, and I, for example, try to create a car and I use the wrong name, I do something like this, and I do this, now I'm getting I'm getting another error because it's saying, hey, I could not find the column with this name in the car schema. That's understandable. Let's instead let's pass an ID here, custom ID. Let's do 10. And let's try to create this. And I should get an error saying, hey, failing row contains this. Null value in column model ID of relation cars violates non-null constraint. So Postgres, in this case, Supabase uses Postgres. It will complain to me if I try to create an item that without passing some data that cannot be null, right? Let's edit this again so you can see it. In this table, I have an ID, I have a created ad, and then I have a model ID. And model ID is not nullable, meaning that if it's missing, I'm going to get an error. In the case of ID and created ad, they can be null. They can not be defined because they have a default value. But in the case of model ID, there is no default value, meaning that we cannot create an item without passing this field. Hey, Demetrius, thank you for coming by. Hope that everything is going well. Nice. All right. So here we've got this. We've got the model IDs. Nice. How about we update some data? Let's come here. Let's add a new request. Let's model ID. Let's just fix this for a second. Model ID. This will be like that. But I want to create a new request. So let's do that. New request. And in that case, this will be update car. And when updating a car, Supabase, let's update an item. It will ask me for two things. First of all, obviously, I need to pass the table, so cars, and then I need to pass the record ID. We need to say, hey, I'm trying to update this specific row. So if we come here, right now we've got two rows in the table. Maybe I want to update the row with an ID of one. Maybe I want to update the row with an ID of three. Let's update that one. So I'm going to say return three, which is the ID of this row that I'm trying to update. And in that case, now again, it's asking me for the data that I want to update. When updating data, then I don't need to pass all the fields. I only need to pass the columns that I want to update. So imagine that I had, I don't know, like 10 different columns, but I only want to update one column. I don't need to pass the value of all the columns. I just need to pass the value of the specific column that I'm trying to update, which is in this case, it's model ID. So model ID. And let's do, for example, 5, like that. So if we inspect this, let's open this, let's play it. Now I should see how the row that I was trying to update, let's refresh it. Now this has a value of 5, like that, which is exactly the same data that I got back from the API when creating this, when updating this. All right, now, what the hell is upserting? Because we just did updating. What's this concept of upserting? Upserting essentially means that you are trying to update an item, but you don't know exactly if that item exists or not. Because maybe that item was already created in the past, or maybe that item was not created. So essentially, with upserting, you're saying, hey, I'm going to send you some data, and I want you to try to find if the object that I'm trying to create already exists. If it exists, just update it. If it doesn't exist, create it from scratch. All right. So it's kind of like a safe way of creating items while making sure that if the item was already created, it's not duplicating the item, creating another one, but instead is rewriting the one that existed, if that makes sense. So let's try to observe some data because we're going to see what's the main difference between these things. So let's do observed car like that. Let's select Supabase. And let's select absurd item. And now you're going to see that there's an additional thing from the update request. Here in the table, let's do cars. And first of all, we're going to see this in a second. Ignore duplicates. Let's ignore this for now. But in the duplicates definition, essentially what we would have to say is, hey, um, we have to define the columns that will that will allow Supabase to decide if an item is duplicated or not. For example, in this case, um, well, the cars example it's a bad example because technically we could have multiple cars of the same model. But imagine that for some reason we never wanted to have more than one model per car, right? Something like that. So I could say, hey, I'm going to pass you the model ID like that. If I send you now some data, but the data that I'm passing to you, this model ID is already defined by another item. So, for example, I'm passing a model ID 4, and there's already an item that has a model ID of 4. That means that it's a duplicate. Now, let's imagine that there is another column. Let's call that column, I don't know, premium, whatever. And so in that case, because I'm passing these two columns, when I pass the data, let's imagine that I would say the model ID. Let's do a practical example. Model ID is number 4. And then also the premium column, which I just made it up, it's equals to true, like that. I could pass more data. Let's imagine that there's more columns. Maybe there's a column or of color, like that. Maybe there's a column of year, like that. doesn't matter. That whatever we put here in the data is the data that we are sending to Supabase. But whatever we put in the duplicates definition, it's what's defining what a duplicate is or not. So in this case, Supabase will look for these two specific columns when checking for duplicity. It will check for the model ID and premium. So if after sending this data in the database, there is already a model that has a model ID, a car that has a model ID of 4 and a premium column of true, that means that there's a duplicate. And then instead of creating a new item, what Supabase will do is it will override it unless you check these ignore duplicates checkbox. So ignore duplicates if true, duplicate rows are ignored. If false, duplicate rows are merged with existing rows. Hopefully this makes sense. So if I don't check this and I send this data and there's already a car with a model ID of 4 and the premium equals to true, then all it will happen is that the color and the year columns of that specific car that it's considered as existing already, those will be updated. But if instead I check this, it will just simply skip that car because it will say, oh, all right, this already exists. I'm going to ignore it. Hopefully this makes sense. If you have any questions, drop it in the comments because I get it that it could be a bit confusing when dealing with duplicates in this case. Let's get rid of. Well, we can keep it as is. I'm not gonna run it because we don't have any columns to check for this, but hopefully you get the drill with these concepts. Nice. And then lastly, very simple, just deleting data. So let's do that. Delete car, like that. Let's come here, Supabase, delete the data. And to delete an item, all we need to do is say, hey, I want you to delete the item from this table and the item that has this ID. So if I wanted to delete this one here, I know that it has an ID of 3. So I would come here and say, hey, delete from the table cars the car with an ID of 3. Let's play this. Let's do it again. Sorry. Let's play this. And as you can see, we've got a successful OK. And Supabase doesn't return the item that was deleted when deleting. Keep that in mind. So if I'm deleting, all I'm getting is these 204 status code which is OK, but there is no content to display. But we can come here, we can refresh, and we can see how the item has been disappeared. There is no item now with an ID of 3. Nice. All right, so with basically all of this here, you are good to go to start building any kind of CRUD application. Anything that requires sending data to the database, reading the data from the database, and mutating the data of the database, you're good to go with this. But now it's time to start talking about more security and authentication, which is what this next part is officially starting everything related to authentication in Supabase. Chan chan chan. We could play some music now. Rolling out the new section. All right. So let's go back here and let's check authentication. All right. So in Supabase, we've got this whole section just dedicated for authentication. Let's do a quick exploring together. There is the users table, very convenient. Right now we don't have any users here, but you will be able to see all the users in your application and manage their profiles in the case that some user wants their account removed, some user wants their account, maybe they need a password reset, something. You can manage all of that from this table. We're going to see that in a second. All right. And then in here we've got some more things that we can play with. First of all, policies, which is everything related to row level security. Again, we're going to see this in a second. Then some settings for signing in and signing up to our application. For example, you can enable or disable if people can create accounts in your web application, because for some reason maybe you want to stop disable of not authentication, sorry, but signups, maybe because it's a limited access, maybe because you want to close the app. I don't know, up to you. There are other things like, for example, allowing anonymous sign-ins, which is something that it's not yet supported in Wist, but it's coming very soon. It's in the backlog, which allows people to sign in without sending their data. So they are kind of like anonymous users. Maybe we can check that in the future when it's supported in Wist. All right, then we can revoke sessions from users. We can also implement rate limits if you wanted to make sure that people are not abusing your application. Then we've got everything related to emails. And that's one important thing. I'm actually going to deep dive into this later when we check the signing in with the magic link. But in Supabase, we don't have app email sending built in. We kind of do because Supabase gives us a development email service, but that development email service is very limited when it comes to the rate limits. I think that you can only send like 2 emails per hour, something like that. Very, very, very limited. So it's only for development purposes, but you're not supposed to use this in production. If you want to use this in production to send emails to the user for a password reset, well, actually, we can see all the emails here. Confirm sign up, invite a user, magic link, change email address, reset password, re-authentication. All of this requires sending an email. And if we want to do it in production, we need to bring in our SMTP server provider. So it could be with any kind of service providers like SendGrid or Mailgun, any of these services, or you could potentially also spin up your own server to do it. But you probably don't want to deal with these kind of things. You just go ahead and pay for a service provider. It's going to be simpler. All right, then we can see also things related to multi-factor, to the URL configurations. Then also for attack protection, we can also see hooks in case that you wanted to trigger some logic when somebody logs in. And then some more advanced things that I don't even know what they include because, yeah, it's just mostly related to enterprise. All right, so now that we know this, let's start doing some things. How about we create a user? We're going to create the user later in Wist, but let's do it now here in the dashboard. I could do two things. I could send an invitation to somebody, or we can create it from here. So let's try it super quick. Let's do an account, test@test.com, and let's just do a very secure password like 123456789, and let's auto confirm the user. If we don't auto confirm the user, then what Supabase would do is send an email to that user, to this email, for them to confirm if they are if they want to create this account. All right. Yes, I know that this password is very insecure. All right. So now that we've got this user, we can see in here some data. We've got a unique ID from the user. We also have a display name, which it's not defined right now, but let's update it. Why not? Can we update it? Raw JSON overview logs delete. No, I don't want to delete. Maybe we cannot update it from here and we need to update it from Wist, which is what we're going to do. Yeah, it looks like we cannot update it from here, which is fine. All right. But users can have display name, an email, of course, phone, because in Supabase we can set up also a phone login in case that you wanted to. I believe that it also requires setting up a provider like Twilio. Twilio, is that the word? Yes, Twilio. But yeah, it's possible. Then we can see the provider that the user used to create the account and to log in, and then some data like the last time that the user signed in. Clan is saying Sangrid and Mailgun got expensive and fiddly. Yeah, I know that there are other options that are cheaper. I just never come up with them. I forget to I need to do some inspecting of the new, fresh, hot new players in the ecosystem when it comes to sending emails. Great. All right. So now that we know how to create a user from the dashboard, how about we come in with and sign in with the user? Before I do that, let me quickly address a comment here, Demetrius. Is there any video of you explicitly explain the differences between ways of auth? I can't wrap my head around JWT session. I remember you had a video on something, but can't remember exactly what. Um, do I have a video about it? I've talked about authentication in the past many times, but I don't know if I have a video explaining the differences. That being said, Demetrius, I can explain those differences um, maybe like 5 minutes before ending the live stream. What do you think? I think that I can give you a pretty good understanding just with a quick 5 minutes. I can draw a couple of diagrams for you to understand it better. Nice. Glenn is suggesting, in case that somebody is assessing to add in as the SMTP provider for emails, Glenn is suggesting to use loops or resend. All right, thank you. Nice. I'm gonna check them. I've heard about resend a few times, and I think that from you as well, Glenn. So that's a good thing. Nice. All right, let's come back to Wist and let's create a request to sign in the user. All right. Usually, I'm not adding any kind of user interface right now in here in the application, but usually what you would like to have is a form with an email and a password fields. So then when the user submits the form, then in Wist, we detect that there was a submit event and we trigger the request. But just for the sake of moving fast, let's create the request. Let's do sign in email password. I'm a tool collector. Nice. All right. So here, if you've been inspecting this, you will see that there's a bunch of methods. We can sign in with password, with magic link, with OAuth. For now, let's focus on password. In that case, we could do both email or phone because, as I mentioned, people can, instead of using their email, they can use their phone. But then you need to validate their phone. You need to send them an SMS to the email to the user. So you want it will be a bit more tedious to do, but it's possible. So the email, let's just hard code it for now. This will be test@test.com, and the password was 123456789, like that. Nice. So if we log in, let me just refresh just in case. If we log in, we're gonna see, yay, success. And what Supabase does a bunch of things. First of all, it returns the data from the user. Nice. So in this case, we can see everything from the user, the unique ID, the role of the user, the email, when the email was confirmed, sorry, some metadata as well for the provider, etc. If we had some metadata stored in the user, we're going to see that later. We also can see that, etc. So we got all these data from the user in here. We also can see data from the session. And the session contains things like an access token, which I could use. This access token is a JWT, as Demetrius was explaining. This is not a session token, it's a JWT because, as you can see, it also includes a refresh token like that. So these access token, we can use it potentially to authenticate our server functions against these user. Maybe we can see that later when we do in another part of this live stream, implementing functions, Supabase functions. So we've got this session, and that's pretty much it, right? But not only that, not only Supabase returns this info, it also remembers the authentication status automatically. All right. So Wist will know when the user has signed in. So then when we reload, we don't need to do anything. Supabase will remember that there is a session, an active session here, right? And to do that, let's quickly implement a request, another request that will be just getting the user. So let's do that. Let's get the session. We can do these two things. We can get the session or get the user. It's a session, but a JWT. Yes. Yes. Because the session based authentication doesn't mean the same thing as the user session. The user session means that there's an active session of the user being authenticated, right? So the user has an authenticated status, a status of authenticated. Session-based authentication, it's the system that it's based on this, but it's not. How to explain it? It's not exclusive. I'll try to make sense out of it later, Demetrius. Don't worry. All right. So Supabase, let's do this and let's get the session like that. In here, if I expand this and I play it, whoops, let's refresh. Nice. So as you can see that it doesn't matter if I now refresh, if I reload the page, doesn't matter. I can still get the session from the user. So I can still get the access token, I can get the refresh token, I can get the user data all in here. And I don't need to handle anything related to storing anything in local storage or checking for cookies or anything like that, or validating if the session is still valid or not. Everything is handled automatically by you here in Wized and Supabase. You don't need to do anything. All right. So as long as I've signed in, now Supabase will remember my session. Obviously, if I sign out, let's do super quick. Let's do sign out like like that. Supabase, sign out, sign out, and we sign out. Why is this failing now? Like that. Now that I've signed out, and we go back to the session. In this case, there is no session. You can see how the session comes in null like this. So if I refresh again, I try to get the session, you'll see that there's no session. So I need to log in again here. Let's log in. Nice. And now I can keep reloading the page. I can navigate through my web application. I can do whatever that it will be remembered. I don't need to be handling stuff like storing the cookies and things like that. It's very convenient, honestly. Way more easy to set up than, for example, in Xano, because in Xano you have to do the whole thing of getting the access token, storing it in a cookie, then when the page loads, try and get that from the cookie, send it to the server, get the user from the authentication endpoint, etc. It's a bit more cumbersome to do. Supabase, all built in, very nice, very simple. Cool. Okay, so we've seen how to sign in, how to get the session. Now, let's put this in practice by going and talking about row level security. Okay. As I mentioned on the first live stream, we talked just a little bit of row level security to explain what it is, but we didn't see exactly how to set it up. Now that we've got authentication in place, now we can start doing some cool things. So let's go to Supabase. All right. And in here, let's go to the policies. So authentication policies. The image is saying one thing that we are sleeping on and trying lately is Pocket Base. Oh yeah, nice. We can absolutely look into this, into Pocket Base. Yeah, I've heard it multiple times. So definitely, maybe we can do a live stream about it in the future. Thank you for the suggestion. Nice. All right. So, authentication policies, and as we mentioned, neither brands, cars, or models have row level security enabled. Now, before doing anything here, let's go to the database. Sorry, to the table editor here. Let's open brands. Let's open cars maybe first, and let's enable row level security in this case, like that. By default, row level security is fully exclusive, meaning that it blocks out everything. So now that I've enabled row level security, if I go to Wized and I try to get some, I've got get models and get brands. So let's enable row level security for everything. Row level security here and row level security here. All right. So now if I try to get brands or I try to get cars or I try to get models, I'm going to get an error. Actually, no. I'm not going to get any error. I'm just not going to get any data. So you can see how the brands request, it's coming empty. There's no data. If I try to get some models as well, this is also coming empty. And the reason for that is because, as I mentioned, we don't have any policies. And no policies in row level security means that there is no way to get that data or to update that data or to delete that data. We need to now um, explicitly tell what can people do and what can um, no, actually, we're not saying what they cannot do because by default they cannot do anything. We need to tell them what they can do. All right. So in here, for now, let's say that only people who is logged in, who is authenticated, can retrieve any models. All right. So here we could say add a row level security policy. And when we click on that, let's do it again. When we click on that, it's bringing me to the authentication section in the policies section, right? And here we can create a policy. By default, when we click on create a policy, we've got some templates in here that many of these templates probably are going to be already helpful for you, like enable read access for all users, enable insert for authenticated users only, enable update for users based on email, enable delete for users based on user ID. That there are many of the typical policies that you would like to implement. But you can either also just write your own policy if you know how to write them, or if you're lazy as me, you can also ask AI. So in Supabase, they've got these Supabase Assistant here that allows us to simply come here and ask it to generate the policy for you. So we can simply describe to it, hey, create a policy that only allows authenticated users to read the models. Let's do that. So create and name a new policy for the public schema on the models table that only allows authenticated users to select data from the table, like that. And automatically, these assistant will start doing things for us. So it's generated this policy like that. So now all we have to do is get this, and either we run this query, which is we'll do this automatically, or in the case that we wanted to use the UI to implement the policy, all we have to do is get this and copy it for the policy. Because remember that, let me just copy this super quick. Remember that a policy looks exactly like this. But in this case, let's just run it. Let's run the query. This query involves running a function. Are you sure you want to execute it? Yes, let's do it. Success. Nice. And now if we did it right, look at this. Models now has a policy. And this policy, it says, allow authenticated users to select from models. Like that. Let's edit this policy super quick. And if we inspect this policy, we'll see that it contains exactly what we asked the AI. So the policy name, the AI just came up with this. Then this is going for the models table. The policy affects the select statements only to the roles for authenticated people. And also, it ensures that the person who is trying to select the data, they have a unique ID in their auth object. So meaning that essentially that they are logged in, right? Because they have an ID. Nice. All right. So now let's go back to the models table in here, and now we are going to see how it contains a policy up here, one-off policy, right? We can test this. If you remember, up here in the top, there is this role selector. By default, the role is Postgres, meaning that it's super admin. We can see everything, doesn't matter the policies, everything works. But we can also choose different roles just for the sake of testing things. And in this case, let's try what would happen if we are an anonymous user. There's no data. As you can see, I cannot change, I cannot see any data right now here in the models. If I move to an authenticated role, in that case, we can impersonate any of the users. I just have one user, so let's impersonate this user. And the moment that we impersonate this user, now we can see all the data. The reason why we can see all the data is because this data is not exactly tied to specific users. It's just, yeah, there's no tying to specific users, but we can do it for the cars, for example. So let's go to the cars table. And I want to, let me move to Postgres. I want to create a new column that points each car to a specific user. Because then, anytime that we are trying to get some cars, we're only going to get maybe our cars. Because me as a user, I'm going to have my own items and I want to get my items. I don't want to get another user's items. So let's create another column here. And let's call this column user ID, like that. And we can add some description like the user that it belongs to, whatever. And we can now do add a foreign key. And this foreign key, um, the schema goes to auth and it references to the users like that. So now we're saying, hey, the user ID, it's pointing to the user's ID like that. Done, save. And now you're gonna see how we've got this foreign key relationship between the user underscore ID column that we are creating in the cars table and the ID of the user rows in the auth table, right? So primary key allow nullable, no. It's unique, no. Yeah, all good, like that, save. And let's see, 1 second. Fail to create column contains null values. Oh, right. See what happened here. We need to allow nullable because otherwise it's impossible because there's already one car existing. So if we try to create a column where no rows can be empty, but there's already existing rows with empty values, we cannot do that. So we need to first do this. We need to point this to a user. So let's do it. Let's point this to this user. And now that all the rows have a value, we can now edit this column and say, okay, this column cannot be null. Because now every time that we're creating new items, we're going to be enforcing those items to have a user ID placed. All right? Okay, cool. So now, if we did this right, what I want to do now is add a row-level security policy as well. But not only that, only authenticated people can read the cars, but also that users can only read the cars where the user ID is themselves. Because if there's more users, I don't want them to be reading data that doesn't belong to them. So let's do that. Let's add a row level security policy. Let's ask the Supabase assistant to create a policy. Let's reset this just super quick. And let's say create and name a new policy for the public schema of the cars table that only allows users to retrieve the cars that belong to them. The cars table has a column called user ID that references the ID of the user that owns it, like that. All right. And Supabase will come up with a policy like that. Okay, so writing the SQL, create a policy, allow users to retrieve their own cars. Nice. On public cars from select, authenticated. And now, as you can see here, it's adding a requirement that says, hey, the ID of the user who's requesting this resource must match the user ID column that we created in the cars, like this. So let's run this. Yes, run the query. Success, all good. And now we've got this policy applied to here. So now if you go to the cars table, let's close this. Actually, first of all, we need to create another user. Otherwise, this demo will be hard to demonstrate. So let's create another user. Let's do test2 at test.com. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Maybe we can call this something different. Let's call this Glenn. Glenn at test.com. Create a user. Nice. And in that case, let's create a car for Glenn. Glenn, are you still around? What car do you want? What model do you want? What brand do you want? Do you want an Audi? Do you want a BMW? Do you want a Seat? A Peugeot? Let's go for an expensive one. A Porsche for you, maybe? Which one do you want? Do you want a Porsche 911, for example? A Porsche Cayenne? Oh, BMW? All right. BMW. Do we have models here? BMW models. Let's do which one? An i7? Let's create an i7 for you. So let's do insert row. Let's do what's the brand? The brand is BMW, ID of 2. ID of 2, and this will be an i series 7. Yeah, okay, i7, and the brand is 2, like that. All right, cool. So an i7 for Glenn. And this is the model with an ID of 8. So let's create this. Insert row, model ID 8, and the user ID will be probably 2. Oh, I need to copy it? Really? Let's go and copy it. So the user ID from Glenn is this. User ID, copy. Nice. Let's go back here. Table editor, cars, new car. And the car, it's model ID. Now the model ID was 8. And the user ID, it's this one. Nice. All right. Because i7 and Series 7, it's not the same. I got you now, Glenn. I'm sorry. Well, you got an i7. Okay, cool. So now that here, let's now see how if we are not authenticated, we cannot see any of the cars. If we are authenticated, so we change the role to an authenticated role, we're going to see how if we impersonate Glenn, now we're going to become Glenn like this. Glenn is only seeing his car where the model ID is the number 8, which is the i7 that we gave to Glenn. If I change and instead of impersonating Glenn, I impersonate the test car, in that case, he is getting a different model ID, as you can see it here. All right? So row level security, as you can see, it's not only a way of securing the data, it's also a very convenient way to query the data based on a specific filter. In this case, we only want users to retrieve the cars that belong to them. That's a filter that you want to implement with row level security. And let's just check this in here. Let's go to Wized. Let's make sure that we have a session in place. Do we have a session in place? Yes, like that. So now, if I try to get some cars, let's create a get cars request, Supabase, get list, the table will be cars, like this. If I try to get the cars now, I'm only going to get one car. I'm not going to get 2 cars. I'm only getting the car that belongs to me. And we can check this because here, the user ID that starts with 3083, like this, it's the same as my user ID here in this session. Where is it? User ID 3083. It's my ID. It's me as a user, and that's why I'm getting that specific car, thanks to the row level security policy. Now, keep in mind that for now, we've only added policies for selecting the data, which means that I will not be able to create any new data. Let's try to do it. If I try to now create a car like this, I will get an error. As you can see here, new row violates the row level security policy for table cars. The reason is because there is no policy that is enabling any actions for creating data. When you create policies here, let's go back to the cars. Let's create a policy. When you create policies, you have to define for which command is the policy. Is it for selecting data? Is it for inserting data, updating data, deleting data, or maybe for everything? That's also a thing that you can do. So, for example, I only want to insert data, allow people to insert data if they are authenticated. So, there's a template for that. We don't need to ask AI. So, let's just select the template. Enable insert for authenticated users only. This policy gives insert access to your table for all authenticated users only, like that. So if we save the policy and now we try to run this again, maybe we need a few seconds. Should be able to do it. No row violates the row level security policy for table cars. Oh, right. Hold on, because I need to pass a user ID. Remember that now there is a requirement of user ID column. So we need to do that, user ID. And in this case, the user ID would be the r.getSession dot data dot user dot ID, I think that it was. Data, no, data session user ID. Data session user ID, like that. All right. If we play this, yes, this is the user ID. So in that case, now I should see it work. Yay! All right, nice. Look at that. Great. So now you know at least some of the basics to start protecting your data using the authenticated status of the user, which is usually what you want to do. Either maybe it's the authenticated status or maybe it's something different, but also always add row level security for the tables for every single item. If it's something that everyone can read, still don't disable row level security. Add row level security and just add a policy that says everyone can read. But at least you've got a policy in place that defines that, because otherwise you're making your data completely unsecure. Glenn is saying, does impersonation carry through to the front end then? No. Impersonation right now, Glenn, it's only available here in the table editor from Supabase. It's just for testing purposes here in Supabase. I'm just thinking this could be useful for admin users using admin screens features in your Wized application. Yes, I know. It would be very convenient. We can always explore this, because maybe we can find some kind of way to replicate this behavior in West. But for now, it's a Supabase thing. For now, just saying for now, all right? Okay, cool. So how about before we end this live stream, I'm officially ending today's live stream here. Next live stream, we're gonna keep talking about the rest of authenticating things, like signing in with magic links, sending out emails, resetting passwords, all these things. We're just gonna talk about it in the next Friday's live stream. Um, for now, let me answer a question that Demetrius had, which is session-based authentication versus JWTs. I don't know if you've read about this a bit, but we can look into it together if you want. But let's just do some quick drawings. Maybe that works better. Ta-ta-ta. Yeah, why not? Let's use this. What is this? Yeah, we can get rid of this. All right. So Demetrius was wondering, okay, session based auth versus JWT auth, like that. Now, keep in mind, I will try to explain. I will try to do my best to explain this, but I'm not an expert, so I'll probably botch some things. I apologize. I apologize if there's any if I don't do a very good job explaining this. But let's start with the simplest one, which is session based auth. All right. Session based auth means that here in your browser, the user is going to sign in. All right. And the moment that the user signs in, our server here, our server will create a session for the user. All right. Like that. So the server, actually, this is the browser, and this is our server. Our server. Come on, server. Now, um, our server, it will create somewhere where it can persist state. It could be in memory, or in a database, or in a KB storage. In many places, it doesn't matter. The server, what we'll do is it will create a session. It will store that session. So these sessions are stored in the server in a way that, all right, there's one session that belongs to the user ID, and it started at some point and it will expire at some other point. Okay, so all this data is stored here, right, in the server, like this. So there's one session, there's another session, there's another session, blah, 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 right? Usually the sessions have, it's not an ID like this, it's like a very unique ID, like a UUID before, like, I don't know, depending on the database, all right? And this sessions identifier is stored in the browser in a cookie. So the browser has a cookie here that has the session ID, like this, all right? But that's it. The browser doesn't have anything else. There's no data in the browser other than just the session ID. Okay, so then anytime that the user navigates through the application, let's imagine that the user goes to, I don't know, like the dashboard. Okay, the browser, what it does is it grabs this cookie and sends it to the server and says, hey, I've got a session ID. Can you check this session for me? And the server comes back to the browser and says, hey, yes, I do have a session. And this session belongs to the user called Demetrius, whose email is this, blah, 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 who's blah, 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 and the user is premium or not. Like, I don't know, like any data that the user has, the server can return it by using the session ID. When checking for the session, not only checks for the session existing, it also checks for more things like, can I write here? No. Is the session existing? Is it expired? Is it valid? Etc. Because maybe if you want to log out a user, all you have to do is go to your server and say, hey, this session, get rid of it. I'm logging out this user, which means that this user, when it tries to, for the next time, access the, communicate with the server, send a session ID, the server will say, hey, this session is not existing. It was deleted. So the user is logged out. All right? Meaning that session-based authentication requires a constant back and forth with the server. Anytime that you need to validate the logged in, the authentication status of the user, you cannot do it on site. You cannot do it in place. You have to communicate with the server, and the server is the one who's checking the stored sessions and validates it and returns to you if the session is valid or not and what data is it holding. All right. When we say session, we mean a Chrome tab. No, doesn't have to mean a Chrome tab, because if I no a Chrome tab, usually it's a it's for the session storage of the so many session concepts. It's a session storage for the browser, which it's a different concept. A session, it will be as long as what the developer decided it to be. It doesn't have to. It depends. It depends on different factors. Dimitris, closing the tab means losing the session. Depends on, is the session cookie stored only for the current session lifetime, or will the session cookie persist? How long will it persist? 1 week? 1 minute? It depends. It depends on you. Also, not only depends the cookie, but also when you send that cookie to the server, how long is that session being persisted in here? Is it being persisted for 1 week, for 1 month? We don't know. Also, there are many websites that what they do is, let's imagine that the sessions are stored for 15 days. All right. But you log in at the day number 10. The server, many times, then it says, all right, the user is logging in and the session is valid for 15 days. But since the session was created, already 10 days have passed. So what many servers do is, all right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to refresh the session. So now I'm returning you the data, but now this session, now it's going to be extended for 15 days more. So from this exact point, I'm giving this session another 15 days before it expires. So it updates the expiry date to extend the session. Because this way, what it happens is that as long as you keep logging in to your account within the range of the allowed session expiry, then you're never going to be logged out, because you keep refreshing your session anytime that you log in. Glenn is saying user log session tend to be tab agnostic, but if you close the browser, then the session tends to expire. Yeah, or if you clean your cookies, for example, because then you're gonna be losing the session cookie, then also you can be potentially expiring the session, not immediately, but because you're not gonna be logging in using that session, it will not um, persist, right? All right, JWT, it's a different way of doing things. All right. With JWT, when the browser signs in, it's sending a request to the server. And that server, what it's doing is, instead of keeping a database with all the sessions and blah, 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 etc., the server does none of that. The server just says, all right, I'm getting a sign-in request or a sign-up request, whatever. What I'm doing now, I'm generating a JWT, and I'm returning that JWT to you. That's it. All right. And this JWT means JSON Web Token, JSON Web Token, and it contains some data. It contains many data that already it's helpful for you. It contains like the user ID. It can contain, it depends, but it can contain the email. It can contain the role. It can contain some additional claims. It can contain many data. All right. At the browser here, it says, all right, I'm receiving this. Good. With this, I already know that the user is logged in. Nice. Now, the problem is that this token, it includes some data, right? Let me give you an example. Let's grab the access token that I got from Supabase. Let's grab this access token. And let's go to jwt.io and let's paste this access token here. Whoops. Come on. Why? Now, all right. So in JWT.io, it's just a public website that you can use for inspecting JWTs because oh, thank you, Glenn. Don't worry, you can watch this later if you want. Because the JWTs include many of the info from the user. So it includes, as you can see, it includes the user ID, it includes who generated, who issued this JWT. It includes some more data like the expiry time, the user email, some metadata, etc., etc. But it also includes a way of verifying if this JWT is valid or not. Let me explain. What happens here is that because there's this object, this JWT that contains the user info, what is preventing for me to just abusing this from updating this, right? Because this JWT, this JSON Web Token is what I'm going to be sending to the server anytime that I want to do something. Like, let's imagine that the user wants to, um, whoops, the user wants to buy a car, right? It wants to buy a car. When sending the car purchase, we need to send to the server, hey, I'm this user, I'm trying to buy a car, right? So there's going to be some back and forth with the server doing some kind of operations. In this case, let's do it simple. Let's create a car like we were doing here in the Supabase, right? The server will say, all right, I need to know who you are. So the server will be expecting that you send to the server the same JWT that you have here, JWT. But this JWT, as we mentioned, it contains all the info. It contains everything: my email, who am I, if I'm verified or not, if I'm a premium user, if I have a subscription, whatever. All that data will be included in here. Meaning that, why don't I simply come here, I modify this data like that, and now you can see how this JWT is changing. So why don't I grab this JWT and this is the one that I'm sending to the server, right? In that case, you cannot do that because the JWTs have a signature. If you can check here, there's different parts. There's the header, which is the red part. There's the payload, which is the purple part. And there is the signature, which is this part in here. All right. This signature, which is the public signature, is used in conjunction with a private signature that it's only leaving the server to verify if a payload has been modified. What does it mean? It means that by default, we are going to get some JWT from, one second, here. We are getting a JWT from the server that contains some data. This data, this specific string is verified by matching the signatures between the public signature, the payload, and the private signature that is on the server. If for some reason I change the payload myself, so here I do whatever to change this payload, when sending these JWT to the server will attempt to verify again with the private signature if something has changed. And when trying to verify using cryptographic methods that I'm really not an expert on, what will happen is that it will fail the validation because the private signature will no longer match the payload that originally contained, because this payload has been mutated, it has been altered, meaning that JWTs are safe as long as the private signature of the server is not disclosed. So Dimension is asking, we're still getting this back and forth with the server then like session, aren't we? Apparently server in JWT also double checks the signatures. Yes, but the benefit of the JWT is that you, because here, anytime that you need to verify from the browser, if I'm logged in the sessions, you have to be checking the session again and again. So you're sending the session, you're getting the data, and you're getting the session back from the server. In the case of JWTs, you don't have to be checking with the server anytime that you want to see if the user is logged in, because you already have the JWT that contains the info from the user. And you also get some other info like the expiry time, the expiry date. So you don't need to be sending this JWT constantly to the server. You only need to send it anytime that you want to perform operations like creating data, reading data, updating data. In that case, the server, yes, will be expecting the JWT to verify who is at, um, who is attempting to perform that action, right? Now, one of the main benefits that you've got with sessions is that you can always destroy a session because the sessions are always being verified from the database that the server is using to store the sessions. But in the case of JWTs, anytime that a new JWT is generated, you don't have control over it. That JWT is out in the wild. You know that it cannot be changed, because if they try to change it, then the verification will fail because of the signature. But you don't have control over invalidating the JWT. You cannot log out a user by destroying the JWT, because that JWT is already given to the user, if that makes sense. So what would be a high level overview of the use case of each? Oh, it depends. JWT, it's used a lot for many systems where there's not a server blocking the serving the content constantly. So, for example, SPAs, mobile applications, etc. Because when you load an SPA, for example, Wized, so when you're working in the Wiz configurator, right? And I'm navigating across Wiz, all of this it's happening on the browser. It's not going to the server and returning me the data, right? So everything is happening on the browser, which means that it's easier to have a JWT that preserves the state that preserves the state instead of having to be back and forth with the server constantly to be checking if I'm logged in or not. But imagine a website that it's everything is server rendered. Everything is coming from the server, yes or yes. In that case, you are already doing trips to the server to get the content, right? And in that case, because you're already doing trips to the server to get that content and the server is coming back to you, in that same trip, you can be checking for the session as well. So it's just a matter of convenience, because really you can implement both sessions on JWTs in all scenarios. But usually what's more recommended is that SPAs, mobile apps, etc. use JWT. And then the rest, it's a matter of convenience, honestly, because there are many, many, many server-side render applications that also use JWTs. It's honestly, I don't know. But I'm a very big fan of session-based auth. If you can use that because you have a server environment, I think it's way more simpler than JWT. Nice. All right. Well, this was supposed to be 5 minutes. It ended up being 20, but hopefully you got some more knowledge today. Nice. Thank you, Demetrius. Okay, cool. Guys, I'm ending the live stream here. Remember, next Friday, we're doing the next session where we will just continue from where we left off here in Supabase into Wized. So see you next Friday. Thank you everyone for coming. Have a nice week. Goodbye all.